Hello and welcome. I'm Fahd Husain. Tonight I want to begin with something personal. In 2002, I graduated from Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism in New York. And I was hired by CBS News at one of the most consequential moments in modern history. 9/11 had just happened, and this was a run-up to the Iraq War. I worked inside the CBS News headquarters in New York at a time when American television news still carried a certain institutional weight. You could disagree with its politics, you could question its assumptions, but there was still a visible culture of verification, editorial caution, and internal debate. There were layers of scrutiny before a sensitive story could go on air. And that is why what we are seeing today at the same CBS that I worked for is so striking. Because the CBS that once prided itself on journalistic rigor is now increasingly becoming a network consumed by ideological battles, collapsing credibility, and editorial activism masquerading as reporting. Over the past year alone, some of the most respected figures associated with programs like 60 Minutes have publicly raised concerns about editorial interference and loss of independence. Executive producer Bill Owens resigned, saying he could no longer make independent editorial decisions. At the center of this transformation is Bari Weiss. She's a deeply polarizing ideological figure whose rise inside CBS has triggered serious debate within American journalism itself. Critics inside and outside the network increasingly accuse the new CBS leadership of pushing coverage in a more openly pro-Israel, pro-Zionist direction, especially, of course, on the Middle East issues. Reports in major international publications now describe newsroom tension over the Israel-Gaza coverage, editorial interventions, and even the sideline and firing of veteran journalists. And tonight, Pakistan has become the latest target of what appears to be this increasingly agenda-driven style of reporting. CBS published a sensational story implying suspicious Iranian military activity inside Pakistan, specifically regarding Iranian aircraft at Noor Khan Air Base, while strongly hinting at military dimensions without producing convincing public evidence. The story quickly generated speculation internationally. Now, Pakistan has categorically rejected the report in a very logical manner. In a sharply worded official response, the Foreign Office called the CBS report misleading and sensationalized, saying it appeared aimed at undermining ongoing diplomatic efforts for regional stability and peace. Pakistan clarified that aircraft from both Iran and the US had arrived during the Islamabad talks process to facilitate diplomatic personnel, logistics, and security coordination linked to negotiations after the ceasefire. The statement further says that the Iranian aircraft currently parked in Pakistan arrived during the ceasefire period and have no linkage whatsoever to any military contingency or preservation arrangement. Pakistan says any suggestion otherwise is speculative, misleading, and entirely detached from factual context. It also reiterates that Pakistan has maintained transparency with all relevant parties while continuing its role as a facilitator for dialogue and de-escalation. Now think about what this tells us. Pakistan today is not a bystander in this crisis. Islamabad has emerged as one of the very few capitals still maintaining channels with Washington, with Tehran, with Beijing, and with the Gulf states simultaneously. Pakistan's mediation role has become strategically important precisely because tensions remain dangerously high and direct diplomacy remains fragile. And yet, instead of carefully examining that diplomatic role, CBS News chose a dramatic narrative built around insinuation, mystery, suspicion, and frankly, fake news. This is exactly the broader problem confronting sections of Western media today. Too many major outlets no longer approach complex geopolitical stories with intellectual humility. They approach them with pre-written assumptions. Countries outside the Western alliance system are often framed not through evidence, but through suspicion. And when journalism begins with a conclusion instead of a question, credibility inevitably collapses. I say this tonight not as an outsider attacking CBS, but as someone who actually worked there and was proud of it. And honestly, watching what has happened to this institution, CBS, over the past 2 decades is to me deeply, deeply disappointing. So now let's deconstruct this entire story, and what's going to come out may surprise you, but it's very important. In fact, I think it's a good thing that now we are getting an opportunity to finally figure out how these stories are coming about, what is actually going on behind the scenes. Well, today we are going to, in many ways, unravel this complex web of lies that lies behind such a content generation. And to help me do that, I'm joined by two very important guests today. Zishan Salahuddin is my first guest. He's a former colleague, a journalist, but currently he's the director at Tabad Lab, and he covers foreign policy issues and is a commentator on international channels. So Zishan, welcome. And of course, we are also joined by Mr. Khurram Qureshi. He's my colleague here at Express 24/7, also a commentator on social media. So thank you both for joining us. All right, now let's start without any further delay. This is the story that we have been talking about, which CBS has published today, and it is based on, there are two features that we want to talk about. The first is, of course, the story itself and how weak it is. But in fact, let's speak about that, because there's another important point that I want to come to that. So Zishan, story, you've been looking at stories, you've been writing stories, covering stories, huge coverage by CBS. You know, they flashed an exclusive sign on top of their homepage. Of course. And this entire story is based on two unnamed officials.
It's nonsense. I mean, the two unnamed officials is, that for me, really grounds the story in whatever you want to ground it into. You can quote anonymous sources and attribute just about anything to them, and on top of that also cite national security issues, and once you combine those two, any story can be absolutely anything. Now, I've scanned through the story, I haven't read through the whole thing, but correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think this story at all mentions the 200 plus Secret Service agents from the US that were also in Islamabad during that same period of time. And somebody could
because of obvious reasons.
Because of obvious reasons. To be here. Pakistan pulled off the impossible. It was a miraculous thing that we managed to do. We were able to put together two rivals that had not been on the same table for nearly 50 years. And of course, in order to facilitate that, Iranian planes are going to be in the country, American planes are going to be in the country, officials from both are going to be in the country. And in the 2 weeks in which we were determining the second round of talks, the cadence, the modality of it, of course those guys are going to be here, but that's not going to be mentioned in here because, frankly speaking, and to be indelicate, this is a hack job.
I'm, Khurram, actually frankly shocked even at a personal level, because I have worked for CBS News, this organization, in New York, in the main headquarters. That was many years ago, 2002 to be exact. And I'm telling you, at that time, the leadership at CBS News, if somebody came with this kind of a story, they would have not only laughed him out of the newsroom, they would have fired him. That's how bad the story is. And today, this old legacy organization is publishing something like this.
I mean, I'm just as shocked as you are, because I also spent my younger days in the US, and CBS was synonymous with credibility. Yeah. People like Walter Cronkite, people like Andy Rooney, and now you have this story where they spoke to anonymous sources. It's like those tweets that we used to see in Pakistan. My aunt's brother's son was there at the petrol pump and there was no petrol. Something like that. And it has absolutely no credibility. And I just saw, when I read the story, I was just like, this has to be something out of The Onion.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, I have to say, I'm not shocked at all. We live in the post-fact, post-truth age. We live in the age of Breitbart and Truth Social and free press. We should not at the least be surprised that has now seeped into mainstream media, and channels like CBS, as you've rightly said, was a bastion of truth and journalism all the way back in 2002.
Dan Rather was such a famous anchor. I used to work on his team, and I'm just thinking, if he were there, what would this would have never come. But here's another interesting thing that I want to point out. Of course, the story is terrible and weak and professionally atrocious, but this is the reporter who's actually written it, and I would like our producer to actually show this name closely, James Law Porter, and of course there are two other bylines also. We call them bylines. But this gentleman has a very interesting history, which we found out while we were researching it. If we can show a little bit more about this gentleman in the next slide. He is this gentleman. national security coordinating producer at CBS News, Washington Bureau. And he was fired by AP because of a wrong story. Now, AP is one of the biggest names in journalism, and why was he fired? The national security, this is the story from AP itself. November 23, 2022, the national security reporter James Laporta was dismissed after being deemed primarily responsible for a November 15 news bulletin that erroneously said Russian missiles had carried out the strike, according to people at the AP. And it's not just AP reporting, you can see his face also, the viewers can also see this gentleman's face. This guy who's written this story was fired because of fake news. And I think we've got another confirmation of his firing in the next slide, if we can take a look at that. Here we are. That's the Washington Post reporting, Associated Press reporter fired. And again, the Hill saying the report, which relied on a single anonymous source, does that sound familiar? single anonymous source turned out to be false. So clearly, Mr. Laporta is in a habit
I think he used the same source in this story as well about Pakistan. You know, the same story, I mean, the same source that he had there. But, I mean, it was just, I remember reading about this 3 years ago because it was such a huge thing. That Russian missile attacking Poland. Everyone was just taken aback at that particular point in time, and immediately it was debunked. And this gentleman, just to add, this gentleman has also served in the US military in Afghanistan.
There you go.
Apparently.
So he gets fired from AP for fake news, is now hired with CBS, and now gives the story. So that tells you about the credibility of the story. But a little bit more about CBS itself, the organization which is hiring such people. Let's go and take a look at CBS now. So, explain this to us.
So, CBS is part of the Skydance Paramount Group. Skydance is basically David Ellison. David Ellison, if you don't know, is the son of Larry Ellison, who is the founder of Oracle, one of the richest men in the world. So in 2025, Sundance Productions, they bought Paramount for about $28 billion. And the Paramount Group includes CBS, CBS News, that we're talking about, CBS Sports, which is huge in America, NFL, baseball, the World Series, the Super Bowl as well. I think next year the Super Bowl is with CBS, if I'm not mistaken. Includes Paramount Pictures. We're talking about Mission Impossible. We're talking about Top Gun Maverick and CBS Entertainment, all the shows, Showtime and the other channels, MTV. The BET network is huge, Comedy Central and Nickelodeon, which, I mean, all the kids like Nickelodeon. So this is the group, and the group is, this is not just the group right now. The group is expanding. It's expanding at a very big pace. And if we come to the next slide.
We can see how it is expanding and becoming one of the major groups in the media. Let's take a look at the next slide. In fact, let me just get off here so we can see it properly.
So what happened was earlier last year, Warner Brothers Discovery, there was a bid by Netflix, and they made a bid for Warner Brothers, but they made I won't call it an error, but they were only interested in the Warner Brothers properties, the intellectual properties. We're talking about Harry Potter. We're talking about the DC universe. So they didn't want CNN or anything like that. These guys jumped in and they said, we'll buy the whole package. And they bought it for $111 billion. And that's still in, the regulators are looking at it, but that merger will go through. So this will form the largest media company in the world, according to estimates. They'll just be bigger than Disney. And Harry Potter, so Harry Potter will be part of this. And because they have a Zionist leaning and everything.
Which we are coming to right now.
But I think it's important to highlight that particular aspect of it right here, in that if this is the largest conglomerate in the world, then the amount of influence that this group has in terms of shaping public narrative, not just in the United States of America, but across the world, by sheer volume of their reach across infotainment, entertainment, and news, is mind-blowing.
Humongous. It's absolutely humongous. You can see CNN is going
CNN will also go there. So
CNN will also go there.
There will be major changes here, and CNN also, once this happens. And why is this of concern? Zishan, why is this of concern for us? Because the people who own all of this, who own CBS, who hired the guy who does fake news, let's go to the person who actually owns this and why it is important for today's discussion. This is the gentleman. His name is Larry Ellison. He is the co-founder of Oracle Corporation. What do we know about him? So
I mean, everything that we've seen so far, you and I were having this discussion right before we started shooting this program. I believe he's the fifth richest
Well, one
person
of the-
in the
one
world.
of the
So,
richest people
just
in the
in
world.
terms of dollar value, a person with tremendous reach, tremendous pull, has publicly positioned himself as a Zionist, as an individual who really believes in the sanctity and security of Israel, and will go to any lengths to try and protect not just the state, but also the various leaders, including Netanyahu, that run that particular that country. And through over the course of time, if you can actually go to the next slide, if I remember the slide.
Let me just quickly go over this. Perhaps, Khurram, you can quickly go over this gentleman, then we go to the next one. His background.
His background. Larry Ellison was the founder of Oracle Corporation. If you're familiar, anyone who has worked in any multinational corporation or any organization, Oracle is a database. It's basically the nervous system of any organization. So he founded Oracle in the 80s. Before that, he also worked for the CIA for a bit, where he was doing databases. And traditionally, he has been a Republican supporter.
But connect him to Zionism.
He is considers himself a very, very strong supporter of Israel and is a very huge donor to Israeli causes.
Hence the headline, Netanyahu on vacation at island owned by Larry Ellison, right? So he lobbied Israeli Mughal to give up attorney for Netanyahu.
Yes.
So they are like best friends.
They're like best friends. And all of this is the backdrop of this is the corruption trial that Netanyahu finds himself embroiled in. We keep reading about it in social media and reports that trial is delayed. It's all about benefits from this billionaire to a public figure.
So this Zionist, who's a friend of Netanyahu, owns the company that owns CBS. So there is a direct connection of this gentleman and his organizations with Israel. And of course, Israel's connection to the ceasefire or the opposition to ceasefire, we will come to that. Next, go to the next slide, where I think Zishan wanted to add something. So,
yeah, I mean, this is something that I didn't know until I read about it, and that's that the single largest gift in the Friends of IDF's history was announced at the event as 16.6 million from the Oracle co-founder, this gentleman that you see on your screens right now. And this, once again, underlines the fact that he is very closely associated with Netanyahu, is very well positioned and motivated to try and push the agenda for Zionism. And therefore, his DNA, his imprint, and his influence is inevitably going to be reflected across the media entities that Skydance and Paramount, of course. And Fahd, I have to say, of course, it's a matter to be upset about as Pakistanis, but at the end of the day, I don't think this is something that we need to be necessarily upset about. Because as the gloves have come off, and the masks have come off, in the international world order, as we have seen international governance effectively collapse, and we've seen what has happened, things like Gaza, things like Sudan and whatnot. I think things like these, all they actually end up doing is really exposing where the nexus really lies.
exactly. So now if we sort of unpeel it a little bit more, this is the guy who owns it, but then he has an enforcer, as they call
who
it.
runs it.
In the mafioso language. He has an enforcer. Who is that enforcer?
Capo, yes. A capo, So this is the underboss.
And who is she? Her name is
Barry Weiss, and
yes.
she's the editor-in-chief of CBS News right now. If I say that she's a controversial figure, that would be a huge understatement.
Yeah.
Barry Weiss is a staunch Zionist. She considers her whole identity to be in defense of Israel, to be to go after anti-Zionist sentiments and to just destroy that narrative. If we come to the next slide. This is from a Guardian article.
About
Barry Weiss herself.
By the way, just to add to her background, she also went to Columbia, so she did an undergrad there. So that's something that I share with her, but not very proud of that. But the interesting part is that the gentleman who wrote this article about her, was also at Columbia with her, and so he knows her from those days, and this is what he writes about her.
So some of the things that he writes about her are that her unapologetic support for Israel and attacks on progressive social justice dogmas. Weiss has consistently provided cover for Benjamin Netanyahu's genocidal government.
So she is a hardcore Zionist. Hardcore Zionist.
Yeah.
And she's been campaigning for Israel since she was a student. And now, she's, wreaking havoc at CBS.
And one thing to note here, Fahd, is that she is very well connected. all the people with money who want to support Israel, they all listen to her. Which is unfortunate. That this is the kind of person, because she's writing stuff about that the famine in Gaza is a hoax. That there was no that people are making it up, and she sort of reprimands people who are objective about what's happening on the ground in Gaza. So it's kind of tragic, and this is who she is. That's the enforcer.
And she's written that. Starving Palestinian children whose images appeared in multiple mainstream outlets were all suffering from some pre-existing conditions. Can you imagine the kind of person who would say that, Zishan? I mean, this is revolting.
Yes, she's on the screen right now.
Well, it's revolting.
We can absolutely. But again, gentlemen, I have to take us back a little bit to the reason why we're upset about all of this, right? Because if we are to really kind of look at this and understand where all of this is coming from and unpack this, this to me does not read like a really carefully crafted kind of, messaging campaign or strategic communications work. This reads like desperation. It feels like, we've all seen the war in Iran. What was the war in Iran? The calculus was...
Can we just get the slide before this on the screen while Zishan is giving his analysis? Yeah, the way we can see.
So the calculus in Iran was that you would take out the senior leadership, the people would rise up, the Kurds would attack, and Iran would absolutely go to the dogs. None of that happened. If anything, they've been put more in power and more in control of the situation than they were before. And that calculus was, and you can see some of these statements coming from, older Israeli leaders like Yoav Gallant, like Smotrich, where they spoke about how Turkey is the new Iran and Pakistan and Turkey are the new problem. Now, they can't really directly take on Pakistan because we're a very strong country. We're also nuclear armed. But Turkey was the next obvious target because it's an entity that constantly needs an existential enemy to identify and fight in order for its own existence. Right? And that's a well-established global fact. So if we were to look at all that, the entire job at CBS looks like a desperate attempt to try and control the narrative in whatever way possible and to mitigate the tremendous strides that Pakistan has made, both in terms of repositioning itself geopolitically, but also reimagining its role as an entity that wants, creates, and actively promotes global security and peace.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, and which is why we have a few more slides to show you.
Just if I could just add something to, absolutely agree with you. And the thing is that whatever she's doing, it seems like she's swimming against the tide. If you look at what's happening inside America right now, especially with young Americans, they are staunchly opposed to Israeli interference in their politics. What's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Iran. There's a 30% approval of the war right now in Iran. And it just didn't start overnight. If you go back to the Joe Biden administration, there were so many protests in colleges that they had to stop, they had to shut down because people realized that what's happening in who is actually running America,
and which is why people like Barry Weiss, who are the editor-in-chief of CBS and who have brought their own Zionist agenda with them into the newsroom, which is why a lot of professional journalists are now either leaving or under pressure because they're seeing the way that this ideologically drenched worldview, which is completely pro-Zionist, is wreaking havoc with these legacy organizations. And one example is right here in front of us, where if you want to share.
So there was a very experienced journalist, Sharon Alfonsi. And she did a report on the Sikot prison, and it was pulled. It was pulled because they showed the reality. And today, if you've seen this post an article in the New York Times, where it's about what's happening inside Israeli prisons. So it was connected with that, and this is the reality. It's not something that you can form. You can't form a narrative around that. You can't gift wrap this. It is what it is. And the thing is,
and they fired him.
They fired.
Barry Weiss then is getting rid of people who have anything critical to say about Israel. That's the state of that media. But again, coming back to what Zishan's point was that I think in a way it is a blessing in disguise. As you said, the mask is off. Now we are seeing the media for what it is. By the way, professional American journalists are also seeing it. It's not just...
And frankly, Fahd, we should not be surprised. as you very rightly pointed out, as these major sort of mergers happen, we're going to see more and more of this coming from more and more mainstream media. For example, CNN, that you've already rightly pointed out, which will be part of this larger conglomerate. But more importantly, I got to ask this question at this stage. Why are we even talking about this? In many ways, if you were to ask my honest opinion, I would say that you, me, and Khurram in some ways today have done a slight bit of a disservice, because we as Pakistanis seem to be stuck in this perpetual, perennial loop in which we take something that has happened internationally and line by line we're giving rebuttals. The Foreign Office has done the same exact thing.
Let me come to that, because I think that's an important point. But before we go to that, in fact, I think that's the next slide. But before we go to that, see, the issue is the timing of this. Now, this story has come. Let's stay on the previous slide. The story has come. And it's this agenda-driven story. And suddenly, you see people jumping on it. So people like Lindsey Graham, we know where they're coming from. They're jumping on it. They are all trying to undermine Pakistan's credibility. Then the Indians are jumping on it. Then the Israelis are jumping on it. Just to add, this timing is crucial. And what I understand is that, this can't be coming from the White House, because the White House or President Trump needs Pakistan to get an off-ramp. The only people who don't want this ceasefire to be successful are the Israelis. And Netanyahu has said so much. And where has he said that? On CBS.
On CBS.
So I think it is clear where this is coming from. And the target is to somehow get the ceasefire, finished so that war can start again, which is why it becomes important. Now, of course, now we go to your broader point. You want to say something?
I just want to add exactly that, Netanyahu, because Netanyahu's interview aired on Sunday. He looked exhausted. He looked, tired. Not the bluster that we see from Netanyahu, how he normally is. In that interview, the sound bites that have circulated all over social media, the war is not over. We can just go in and get the uranium. And President Trump told me that, and it's not over. And the social media is a huge issue. And whenever we check it, there is someone in a basement in Pakistan.
So now they're getting obsessed with Pakistan.
We are getting quite obsessed with Pakistan. So Pakistan is in his head right now, and
living rent-free.
Living rent-free in his head. Because when you think of Pakistan, it's synonymous with diplomacy, mediation, and the ceasefire. Nothing that Netanyahu likes.
All right, so let's now finally go to what do we do from here. So this is what we've done, but I think let's end on a larger, broader point. Looking forward, because this is a battle of ideas, a battle of narratives, and this is a battle that's going to rage more and more ferociously as the time goes by.
Of course, but I think that the shape and nature of that battle is something that we can directly affect and control, right? The loop that I was speaking about earlier that we seem to be stuck in is to be constantly responding line by line to anything that comes out in the West, statements that are made, what the White House says, what Netanyahu says, whatever. Pakistan is always on the defensive. And I think in the last 30 to 40 years, one of the key global wars, so to speak, that we've lost is the Stratcom war. Pakistan has always been in the news for all the wrong reasons. We are very, this is very new to us, being in the news for all the right reasons, being positively praised by the White House and spokespersons, by President Trump. This is a completely new era for us. So the question then becomes, do we remain the sovereign state that continues to rebut things as they're coming to us, or do we shape our own narrative? And I think the way forward has to be the latter. We have tremendous coordination between civil and military leadership in this country, despite the plethora of problems. I labeled all of those in your office earlier. We have managed to pull this incredible thing off. The CDF is on board. The Prime Minister is on board. We've hired people like Musharraf Zaidi, who represent, the Prime Minister's, who's the Prime Minister's spokesperson in foreign media. We have the room and the space available to us right now to be able to fundamentally alter the manner in which we present Pakistan to the world. And I think that, and there's a couple of bullet points that are listed here, that is the fundamental way forward. Channel and leverage the wide variety of the gray matter that exists in Pakistan. Academics, journalists, think tanks, and intellectuals, deploy those guys. Completely revamp the strategic communication policy that we deploy on the international front, and use this specific opportunity, this moment in history, it's a historical moment, to really use this as a launch pad to negate all hostile international
Absolutely. We have a golden opportunity for that, and I think this CBS Hatchet piece, I think is a reminder that we really need to, we need to answer, but answer shouldn't be the primary strategy. The primary strategy should be making the other people answer. Or what do you think?
100%.
That should be the largest.
I would like to be in a newsroom in which they are discussing one of our stories in a year from now.
And
I would just like to add, I completely agree with you. And, we're taking a story seriously which quotes unnamed sources written by a
But
guy
I think it's important
who has
because
a
of the
history
time.
of lying.
No, I would slightly disagree with both of you in a sense. I think it's important. You should not leave any accusation unanswered. It should be answered.
Agreed.
It should be demolished. But that should not be a primary thing. Our primary thing would be, I agree with you. We do your own thing, but don't let such kind of trash be left unanswered. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. That was a kind of a dissection of this piece and how it is being pushed by vested interest. Of course, we all hope that the mediation efforts that we are doing lead to a successful end to this war. So here we are, a story by CBS which is very light in terms of its professional authenticity, the way that the reporting should be substantiated. Pakistan, of course, has completely denied its contents. This story coming from CBS obviously has a lot of background. CBS, what's happening there, we've already talked about that. And also the role of is pro-Israeli sentiments and policies in US media are not a new thing, but they seem to be intensifying as time goes by. Today I want to actually do a deep dive and understand what is generating this kind of content, and specifically in terms of Pakistan's role and where Israel stands in reference to the ceasefire and the statements coming from its leadership. So there's a lot to unpack today. And I've got three guests with me who are ideally suited to help us do exactly that. Zarar Koro, my colleague, does a wonderful show on Dawn News, columnist, journalist, keeps a very close eye on all of these things. Fasi Zaka, again, one of the most well-known political commentators in Pakistan, and Khurram Hussain, Pakistan's foremost business journalist and columnist who writes for Dawn newspaper. Very grateful to all three of you. Zarar, you've seen that story. Let's now quickly look at it from a journalistic point of view. I'll give my own opinion, but first I want to start with you. You read the story, you've been a journalist for so long. What strikes you the most?
What strikes me the most is the absolute implausibility of it all. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that Iran did park its not just aircraft, but military aircraft in Pakistan. Okay, let's say that that's within the realm of possibility. I would say that Noor Khan base would be the worst possible choice, because all of this happens during the ceasefire. And we also know that during the ceasefire, Noor Khan base received some very high-profile visitors from the United States of America. J.D. Vance, and it's not like he came alone. He came with an entire security detail. The entire place was vetted, locked down, so on and so forth. At that point, what happened? Did we cover the Iranian military aircraft with the tarpaulin? Did they not know about it? For me, it's not only the looseness of the story, the unsubstantiated quotes, the little aside about Pakistan misleading the US. For me, the only real surprise about the story is that it has come so late in the day. Because it's not so much about the story, it's also about the source of the story. And I'm sure you'll talk about that in a little while. CBS, after all, owned by, Skydance Paramount, which is, of course, a company of Oracle. Oracle is owned by or founded by Larry Ellison. Larry Ellison, a tech giant, is also the largest private donor to the Israeli Defense Forces, the Israeli Army. Avowed Zionist. Moment he put Barry Weiss in there, we also see that CBS's ratings start plummeting, sort of like the opposite graph of what oil prices are doing right now. Which is also interesting, because if we were to look at it right now from the Zionist perspective, Fahad, they are only just doubling down on what has worked for the last 6 to 7 decades, which is buying or bullying mainstream media, mostly buying, sometimes bullying, getting rid of dissenting voices, so on and so forth. We know what Oracle's philosophy on Israel is. We know that in Skydance, the parent company, people have been told that you have to be pro-Israel or you can find another place to work.
Yeah.
This is also the same company that recently bought TikTok USA. And the reason that TikTok USA was even sold, and we know that Congress passed like legislation to this effect, is because the amount of pro-Palestinian narratives on TikTok vastly outnumbered the pro-Israeli narrative. So when the Zionists are faced with this, they use the same tactic, which has worked in the past, but which has stopped working now. Because as you correctly pointed out, I mean, Gen Z is what, like 75% anti-Israel, which is a mirror image of the boomers, which are 75% pro-Israel. And no matter how much media they try to buy, no matter how much they try to rely on their traditional tactics, they find that it's backfiring. But they can't, they can't revise their stance. They certainly can't change their behavior. So they can only double and triple down. But it's clearly not working. No one's buying it.
Let's come back to that. Because I want to speak a bit about, how this entire legacy media is working there and what kind of pulls and pressures. But firstly, just to come back to the story itself, full disclosure, I worked for CBS News for some time in New York, in the main headquarters. And I was just looking back, I was just thinking, firstly, that, when I was there, if this kind of a story would have come into the newsroom, they would have, laughed the reporter out saying, where are your sources? Where is your evidence? Here, in this story, as you've also seen, these reporters are just quoting two unnamed officials. That's the entire peg of the story. And all the rest is just padding and slanted context. So why do you think, how do you think such, lightly substantiated, clearly, agenda-based story would be projected so much by an organization which has such a strong legacy in America?
So I think even if you had gone 5 years ago, maybe they would have also bumped the person pitching the story because editorial standards remain strong at that point. And one of the ways to look at this is to look at the change in leadership. Bari Weiss, who's been around for a while and who's been promoted primarily because she's not woke and also because she tends to say she likes heterodox voices. Heterodox voices are the voices that at least more responsible media tends to keep out because they're neither credible nor are they balanced. They're much more inflammatory, and the aim is, of course, to go back to ideology. In her own personal ideology, Bari Weiss is what we would call a buddy Zionist as well. So there are reasons for that to happen, and we've seen that at least if we look at the way Israel's been speaking and mentioning Pakistan occasionally, there are countries within the Middle East, unions also, that have a problem with our role as a mediator. And like what Zarar said, it is interesting that this is sort of like a Hail Mary, a last-minute attempt. But I think that the media ecosystem, the fact that it came from CBS is something that has surprised a lot of people. But what I guess showed some degree of health is that it did not carry in the way that maybe even CBS would have thought, that this was explosive news, that the mediator was partisan. We've seen that the story's been carried a lot through Indian publications, through a few others, but it hasn't had the bipartisan across the aisle acceptability that one would think it would have. And the other thing is obviously is that the press has been under a lot of pressure, both economic because of changing distribution models, also the presidency of Trump, where he's had a much more antagonistic view of the press. He limits their access. Behind the scenes, he was also very overjoyed at Bari Weiss finding a new role for herself to bring down traditional media. So I particularly think that this is a result of both long-standing pressures on traditional media, but also some topical ones from one particular presidency. But I would add one piece of caution, is that while we think this is reflective of the edifice of old media coming down. New media, while it looks like it's all independent voices, we've seen after the Gaza crisis, the genocide, that new media is also very susceptible to the administration, and they've been implicitly curbing voices for Instagram, Facebook, and others to make sure that the algorithm does not reward a percolation of truth from the bottom upwards. And they made it very difficult for a good number of Palestinian journalists, for example, to get the word out. So, I mean, I think that I agree that it's, on a political level, it's a state that has done an overreach, which is Israel, committed a genocide. It's trying its best to get the narrative back. But both old and new media, to a great degree, are compromised in how much they'll allow this discussion to go forward. But I just think the nature of the excess is so massive that it's very hard to get around it.
And this is something, Khurram, that the kind of discussion that we are having now on a story from a platform like CBS, a couple of years back, as Fasi was correctly saying, it would have been difficult because these organizations, they've had very long a history of adhering to the principles of freedom of information, freedom of press, and of course they've always been slants towards their own biases, but nothing as obvious as now. I was recalling the time that I was working there, Khurram, and you'd remember, this was the time when America had just invaded Iraq. So I remember I was in the newsroom in CBS in New York when that shock and awe bombing started. We all remember. And it was coordinated. The CBS newsroom was told by Pentagon that the bombing is about to start, so get your cameras ready. So this kind of a coordination is always there, but there was always a struggle between trying to find some balance. Media of say 20 years back, CBS or NBC or ABC, and what is happening now, what Zarar and Fasi have talked about, how somebody like Barry Weiss or somebody like Larry Ellison are now calling the shots. This is a far cry from the media that you've also consumed when you were in the US.
Yes, absolutely. I'd agree with that, Fahd. In fact, you mentioned the coordination with the military. The interesting thing is in this story, when they went to CENTCOM to ask them for a comment, CENTCOM referred them to Pakistan and Afghanistan, said go and get your comments from the governments of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And they actually mentioned that in the story itself. Notice CENTCOM did not say no comment, and CENTCOM did not simply decline to comment. They actively said, go to Afghanistan, go to Pakistan, and get your comments from those governments over there, meaning those are the most important voices for you in this story. So I think in the spirit of, the coordination that you were talking about, it's kind of meaningful that CENTCOM's point to them was to go and speak to the Pakistanis. And when they came to speak to the Pakistani authorities about this, what I notice is the manner in which they present it is that it's as if, and this is something that I think we all know from having done this kind of work, where you have as a reporter an end point in mind where your own wishes for something to be true get in the way of sifting through the facts, where your conclusion comes first and your reporting comes second. We've all seen this sort of thing in the course of our careers. And I'm seeing that in this particular story at this location, where they ask the Pakistanis for their comment, and then they include this line. They say, on Tuesday, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in a statement, confirmed Iranian planes were in the country. Full stop. But then if you read the Foreign Ministry's statement, what it's saying is something completely different, right? It's saying those are the aircraft in which the Iranian negotiators arrived for talks. What are you talking about? But to present that statement as, well, they confirmed that there were Iranian planes in the country, without mentioning that, well, those planes had a very good reason for being there. They were there after the ceasefire. They were there to carry the Iranian negotiators who were going to be part of the talks with the American delegation. I mean, how else would CBS have the Iranian negotiators arrive?
Come on a flying carpet, I suppose.
Or on foot?
Yeah.
Flying carpet.
Catapult. Or a flying carpet, maybe. I mean, given the kind of biases that are...
They'll hang on to a Shahid drone and just sort of wheel their way.
Yeah, I mean, And then also regarding Afghanistan, they mentioned that a civil airliner is seen in Kabul. Well, did they make any attempt to try? It doesn't say when that airliner actually landed. And it's a civil airliner, for God's sakes. If a civil airliner is in Kabul, what does CBS want? That it should have been bombed in Iran? Because their whole story seems to be saying that these planes should have been left in Iran so the US could have bombed them, or Israel could have bombed them instead. Okay, I'm not saying I understand that, because planes are going to either go into hardened shelters, and those that cannot, they'll go to places where they can not be bombed. I don't know. Certainly they don't have any evidence that those kind of planes came to Pakistan. But civil airliners, if a civil airliner has gone to Kabul, if it was, let's say, already in Kabul for a flight, and then the bombing began, and it decided not to fly it, and they decided not to fly it back, were those the circumstances? Why is that something that has CBS News all uppity? Why are they getting so upset about the fact that a civil airliner was part of Kabul? So I think there's a lot wrong with this story.
It is. And if I were to bring it into context also, by the way, absolutely, as all three of us saying, I was just thinking that, if you're a freshman in college and you're doing like a journalism 101, and this story was brought to you, the professor would give you an F on this. It is so poorly written and poorly structured. But
the thing is, though, Fahad,
yes, please go
is
ahead.
that while it's important, as Khurram has done, to dissect this story with a sort of journalistic scalpel, if you will, I think that we need to recognize that this isn't journalism, nor was it meant to be journalism. This is a propaganda hit piece done at the behest of Israel and the Zionist lobby, and it follows the standard patterns thereof. Whatever CBS may have been 2 years ago, 3 years ago, is a moot point now. Because now CBS is very clearly an outlet not just for American propaganda or, say, the Trump administration's propaganda, but primarily propaganda on the behest of
that's the point.
Israel. Now let's zoom out on that for 1 second. Take a look at what Netanyahu said about Pakistan just a day ago, 2 days ago. Take a look at what Naftali Bennett, or for example, the Israeli ambassador in India, something Reuben, I don't remember his name. See what they have consistently said, and you will realize that this is not like a revelation. It's right there in front of us for us to pick up the pieces and connect them, how we Jews do. Is that Israel is clearly trying to drive a wedge of distrust between the United States of America and Pakistan. And that, again, not rocket science, is that Israel wants the war on Iran to continue. This has been Netanyahu's dream ever since he was a baby. I bet his first words were not mama or baba, it was mom. Iran is 5 weeks away from making a nuclear device.
And so that goes to the heart of the timing of this story, I think, what you're saying.
Exactly.
The direct connection.
And that is the context, in my view, which we should be looking at this. Forget about their sourcing wasn't great, or this would have been laughed out of any newsroom. We all know that. But we have to understand that the purpose of this is not to create a work of journalism, it is to create a work of propaganda.
You make a very important point, I think, if I can bring Fassi into this. Fassi, I think that's a key point. I was about to come to that. I'm so glad Azrar picked it up. The fact is that, this is, for example, would this story benefit the Trump administration? Probably not, because they want a good off-ramp. They know that Pakistan is playing a key role. They're depending on Pakistan. So it doesn't make sense for the American administration to plant something like this, but it makes absolute total sense for the pro-Israelis to do it, because they are the ones who are not wanting the ceasefire to continue. They are the one. Netanyahu is saying openly, again on CBS in 60 Minutes, that this war is not done. So the sourcing of the story, where it is being pushed from, it's very clear that it's Israel, pro-Israel, not probably the White House or the State Department.
Yeah.
So, I'd agree with that. And I also think that in terms of when organizations in the US, they look to Israeli sources, Israel does bring with it one sort of credibility, which is that it's got a massive surveillance network, a massive ability to get data out. And of course, it uses that data selectively to get what it's done. This one, of course, does not seem to have any basis in truth. Partly, as I think Zarar said before also, is that if you wanted to hide a plane, you wouldn't hide it in Noor Khan Air Base, you know, because Majid, the Coca wala, will be able to confirm it, other people who will be able to see it. It's not one of those places where you'd definitely try to hide something like that. I also think that in terms of timing, it does seem odd that it's come late, but at one level, it also makes sense. The negotiations have gone on, you know, they're in a form of abeyance every so often, and there is a lack of agreement. But the one thing that has held is neither party, which is the US or the Iran, has lost faith in the convener or the middleman, which is Pakistan. And when one looks at this particular story, which is, as has mentioned, is poorly sourced, it also defies believability, is primarily there to drive a wedge between the US and Pakistan. One would imagine that if this is one of a series, it'll also do things that will try to drive a wedge between Iran and Pakistan, because for something that is tenuously held together, the fact that whether people like it or not, the medium of exchange happens to be the offices of Pakistan.
Correct.
It's important to let that continue, because continuity is the possibility of coming to an agreement. And I personally think that, you know, it's obvious that something like this, which doesn't, you know, cut the mustard, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny, is trying to achieve something. And in this particular thing, we're seeing that there is a lull, there is a back and forth, there's a lack of agreement, but the thread that holds it together is the acceptability of Pakistan to both parties. And if that is severed, then Iran may get what it, Israel may get what it wants, which is a continuation of the war.
And there is also, Khurram, finally a sign of desperation coming from the Israeli side, knowing well that, you know, they've not been able to do what they wanted to do, that the Trump administration is going other way. And also the fact that you, Khurram, have also been tracking very clearly and very closely is the fact that a majority of the opinion, public opinion, especially among young Americans, is moving away from Israel, becoming anti-Israel. And that is something that will probably is coming as a huge shock to the Israeli lobby. So perhaps, you know, all of these pressures are making it do this kind of crude stuff that we are seeing.
Well, there's no doubt about that, Fahd. I think this particular piece is an attempt, as Fasi said, to drive a wedge between the parties that Pakistan is trying to broker, and between all of them and Pakistan. There'll probably be other attempts to do so. There will be material sourced, maybe even to the Iranian side, saying that we don't have, that some people on the Iranian side have expressed a lack of faith in Pakistan's ability to serve as a broker. There may be other such pieces that will come. Clearly, whoever is behind this propaganda, and I think it's quite obvious given Barry Weiss at CBS and the angling in this particular story, that the Israelis are. And those among the Trump administration who believe that the US should continue with the war and quote unquote finish the job. They want to basically push on through all the way till regime change, and they are opposed to the fact that Donald Trump stopped when he did and moved into ceasefire and talks instead. Now they're trying to derail the talks. And one way of doing that is to sow mistrust between the various parties. If this is the best they could come up with so far, then it's a weak effort, but I think they may well come back and strengthen that effort. I think it's also important to keep an eye on who's amplifying these stories and in what manner. For example, Lindsey Graham is one person who has picked up this story very early and said, well, if this is true, then Pakistan's role as a mediator must be examined very, very closely, thereby really proving to us what the purpose behind this story was. It was to try and diminish Pakistan's role as a mediator in all of this.
Absolutely.
To see if that can help derail the talks. But the talks are continuing nonetheless. They're a lot slower than perhaps what people imagined at the start, but these things are, but it's going to take time. These things always do.
Yeah. And as they say, forewarned is forearmed. So we should be ready for all of this. Thank you so much, Zarar Khoro, Fahd Husain, and Fasi Zaka for joining us and really giving your in-depth analysis on this on this topic. So, as you can see very clearly, this story that we are talking about, it's very hard to take it seriously, not just because it is poorly sourced, poorly written, poorly edited, poorly drafted, poorly structured, but also because it is coming clearly from a slanted agenda that is aimed at harming or damaging Pakistan's credibility as a mediator between Iran and the US, and there is no doubt that it is being pushed by the Israeli lobby for this very specific agenda. That is all for tonight. We will see you tomorrow.